Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us from the True Stories collection, as in, it actually happened at an event I was actually judging. Amy's going first, and she reveals a Devourer of Destinies. She exiles 3 cards, then puts the 4th into her hand instead of on top of her library. Nick calls for a judge and says that since Amy's playing first, she skips her first draw step. Taking for granted that this was an honest mistake from Amy, what is the appropriate infraction, penalty, and fix? Alright, so the root error here is that Amy put a card into her hand rather than on top of her library. That was the first time a player did something that was against the rules. I'll start by talking about what to do at competitive rel, and then explore how I would adapt that fix to regular. The infraction that best fits what Amy did here is hidden card error, because Amy's mistake cannot be fixed using information that's available to both players. If Amy had started to put the card into her hand but stopped before it touched any of her other cards, she could just put it on top of her library like she's supposed to and continue on with no infraction. But once it touches another card in her hand, that's the bar most judges use for determining when that window closes. The standard penalty for this infraction is a warning. As a bit of an advanced note, if you're familiar with the IPG, you might have recalled that if a player draws an opening hand of 8 cards, that actually falls under a different infraction called mulligan procedure error. And maybe you wondered if that might be appropriate for this case. However, the ability that lets you look at your top 4 cards triggers during the upkeep, and mulligan procedure errors are not assessed after the start of gameplay, so this infraction would not be appropriate. Regarding the fix, Amy's hand now contains more cards than it is supposed to. The IPG specifies that this is fixed by revealing Amy's hand to her opponent, who then chooses a number of cards equal to the excess, i.e. 1 card for this case. As you can see from the text on screen, this card needs to be previously unknown to Nick. This line means that Nick could not choose Devourer of Destinies because Amy revealed this card from her hand before she committed the infraction. Both players therefore know that this card should legitimately be part of Amy's hand. If Amy had taken other pregame actions, or if Nick somehow knew other cards in Amy's hand, including for non-gameplay related reasons, like Amy accidentally dropping one that Nick saw, that could also affect which cards Nick could choose. After Nick chooses a card, the last step of this fix is to return that card to the correct zone. Normally, if a player draws an extra card from their library, the fix would be for the extra card selected by the opponent to be shuffled back into the library. This case has a special additional wrinkle though. Before putting the card into her hand, Amy knew what the card was since the Devourer of Destinies revealed it to her. Since the identity of that card was known to Amy before the infraction was committed, the correct fix is to put it on top of her library rather than shuffling it in. Some judges or players might argue that because Devourer of Destinies says you may put a card on top of your library and Amy didn't, the correct zone to move this card to would be the exile zone, but I stand firmly against this interpretation. It's pretty clear from the events that happened that Amy intended to exile 3 of the cards and put 1 somewhere else. The problem is that she put that card into the wrong somewhere else. It's not like one interpretation yields a legal play whereas the other doesn't, so the better interpretation of the player's actions is the one that aligns with what the player was clearly intending to do. Okay, now that we've got a good handle on this situation at competitive rel, let's look at what I would recommend at regular. I've noticed a lot of the time on this channel, my fixes tend to be pretty similar between these two, maybe with a minor modification. This time though, I would say that the fix of letting an opponent pick a card out of Amy's hand would be pretty inappropriate for regular. This fix is pretty strict because the goal of the fixes at competitive rel is to restore the game state as close as possible while also minimizing the potential for the infracting player to benefit from the mistake. In competitive rel, the second of those goals is given a higher priority, but in regular rel, the reverse is true. Therefore, rather than letting the opponent pick a card, I would either return a card at random, or maybe even just ask Amy which card it was and take her word for it if it looked like Nick would be alright with that. Regardless, I would leave the card on top of Amy's library rather than shuffling it in. The philosophy behind this is exactly the same as it would be at competitive rel. Amy may have made game decisions based on her understanding that she would have access to that card. Nothing about the infraction Amy committed changed which 8 cards she would have in that set, or gave her information about those cards before the time when she normally would have had it. Therefore, shuffling one of those cards in rather than leaving it on top would be a more disruptive thing for the game state with no other benefit. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.